What's up guys, Tristan here, back with another video. Sadly, I have a flat tire on my Super 73, so right now I am on my way to Super 73 headquarters. I have no idea how to change a tire, and there's no tutorials on it, so I figured why not have the guys show me how to change a tire. So not only will I learn for next time, but you guys will learn how to do it as well. So me and Steph were riding around looking at open houses, and about 4 miles from home, something happened. I don't know if I ran over anything or what, but the tire just went completely flat. So Steph had to ride back to our apartment by herself, get my car, come back, and we had to load my bike into the truck. So I'm headed to Super 73 headquarters right now, as I just said a couple minutes ago, and we're gonna learn how to do this thing. Cool. Alright, so I just pulled up to HQ, already unloaded my bike, but check this out. Here's the flat, right here. It's done. So I'm here with Josh, and if you guys don't remember him, he's the one who helped me install, or actually did the full installation on the suspension fork, and now he's gonna walk us through how to change the tire on the Super 73 down here.
So we have flush cutters for cutting the zip ties that hold the cables to the frame. We have a 5mm and a 6mm Allen wrench. This is for the 5mm for removing your brake caliper. The 6mm is for removing the hardware for removing your rack. The 13mm goes with the 6 for removing the rack, and then you have your 21 for removing the nut that holds the wheel to the frame.
So this is the tube you said?
Yep.
Awesome.
So we'll start by taking our flush cutters, and we'll cut away the zip ties that are holding the motor cable to the frame, only up until the controller connector. So carefully, without cutting the cable, cut both the zip ties, and that'll allow you to unplug this motor connector, and that'll be good. So the next thing we can do, we can use the 5mm Allen wrench, and then we can pull the brake caliper off the frame. You can do this without pulling the brake caliper off, but taking this off allows you to prevent any damage to the brake pads itself when you're putting the wheel back in. Just set that aside, making sure you don't kink any hydraulic hoses. The next thing we can do, we can take our 6mm Allen wrench and our 13mm wrench, and we can we'll loosen the top rack bolts, and then we'll completely remove the bottom rack bolts. This one's going to be a little tricky to get to, but you don't have to completely remove the nut or the bolts. Just loosen it enough so that the whole rack can spin. Just watch out, make sure you don't damage the taillight. That should allow us to pop that back. By taking the rack off, it doesn't allow the rack to squeeze the frame as tight, so it should give you more play so you can drop the wheel in easier. All of that off, you can take your 21mm and you can go ahead and loosen the nuts holding the wheel axle to the frame. Watch out for that brake caliper. Make sure the bike is sitting a little forward. And you're gonna drop the wheel out. Watch your fingers, don't get it caught in the chain. It should drop right out. Take the chain off. And now you have your wheel off completely. Ready to put the new inner tube inside. So, place the inner tube on your rear wheel. The first thing I would do, I would let all the air out of the inner tube, just so it's easy to work with. If you have a schrader valve core removal tool, go ahead and use it, just so that any air that's stuck in there won't give you any issues. And so getting the tire off, if you need to, you can use a pair of tire levers, but the tire comes off pretty easily. I would just work from one side, get your finger under there, and pop that whole side off. You only have to take half the tire off. This makes it a lot easier to swap out your inner tube. With your tire halfway off, you want to push your schrader valve through the hole in the wheel so that it's free. Pull the inner tube out of the tire, and you can put that aside. So if you have a flat tire, the first thing I would recommend you do is to start looking at the tire and seeing if there's anything sticking into the tire that may cause another flat. Because maybe a little thorn from a rose bush or anything could still be stuck in there, hard to see. But give it probably a couple miles and it's gonna work its way right into the inner tube and give you another flat. So luckily this looks mostly clean. We'll inspect the inner tube after. But we're ready to put a new tube in.
Awesome.
So now that we have the inner tube out, we've inspected the tire and seen no issues. It's probably a pinch flat of some sort. We're gonna go ahead and install the new inner tube. I would put a little bit of air in there just so it has a little bit of shape so it's easy to install. So with your tire inflating gun, with your foot chuck, whether you go to a gas station, you have your own mini compressor at home, go ahead and inflate inner tube a little bit. Just enough so it has some shape. And now you're gonna take the schrader valve, align that with the hole in the wheel. So that'll go with this hole here. You're gonna lift this tire, which is just halfway off. You're gonna slide the inner tube right back in place. And if you have a tire liner, not the wheel liner, but the tire liner that protects anything from stabbing through the tire into the inner tube, make sure that is all aligned and not binding up so it doesn't cause any pinch in the inner tube. Just be very careful there. This should all just kind of tuck right in. So now we're gonna realign this. When we push this tire down with the inner tube, we're gonna make sure that we push the schrader valve right through the hole because it's gonna be hard to get to after. Once the schrader valve is through the hole, you can grab your cap and just lock that on. This will just stop the schrader valve from popping back through the hole. And so now we're gonna put the tire back on. The reason I only say take it halfway off because it's even easier to put it right back in. All you're gonna do, you're gonna push the bead of the tire, so the edge of the tire, you wanna push that down so it sits under the rim. That'll be the bead of the rim. And then you wanna kind of straighten the schrader valve. You wanna make sure it's going straight toward the center of the wheel. It's not sticking at an angle, because that could also cause some damage in the future. So make sure that's straight out. And now you can take your cap off, and we're gonna inflate the tire again. So this time we inflate the tire. When we inflate it this time, we're not going to inflate it all the way to 20 psi, the recommended psi for running our tires. We're going to inflate it to about 10 psi or so, just so that we can make sure nothing's binding up. And then once we make sure everything is in place, that the bead of the tire is seated, then we'll inflate it all the way, and then we'll double check everything. All right, so tire is partially inflated. So what I would do, if you go around the edge of the tire where the wheel is in the tire, the bead of the tire, go along and just push the bead in against the tube. This way, once you put the rest of the air in, it's going to push the tire right against the wheel instead of allowing the tire to bulge out of the wheel. So we'll flip it over, check the same thing. Sometimes it'll stick, so instead of pushing all the way over, it'll just pop right out. And as an extra caution, since it has a little bit of air in it, what I like to do, I like to bounce it on the floor a little bit. This will help push the tire out against the wheel as well. And if it wasn't seated correctly in the previous steps, it'll stick out now, allowing you to fix your mistake before you get it on the bike and hurt yourself. So we recommend about 20 psi in our tires, front and rear, for normal riding. Cool, just about there. Go ahead and take a look again after we pressurize this correctly. Nothing is bulging out. The tire isn't damaged. All right, so when we're ready to reinstall this, You want to make sure that the brake rotor is on the left side of the bike, just like the front brake rotor. And then on the right side of the bike, you have the freewheel, because the drivetrain components are on the right side. You want to make sure also the washers that come with the motor, they normally don't always come off, but the flat washers that come with the motor are inside. These are going to be between the wheel axle here and between the frame. And the last thing, you also want to make sure that the wiring harness has to face down. So it has to point down instead of pointing straight up. Alright, so when we go ahead and install this, watch out for the fender. If it makes it easier, you can take the fender off completely to install it. And then keep in mind the suspension fork does raise the height a little bit, so it might be a little hard to get on at first. So before you pull the axle into the dropouts, you want to grab the chain. You want to make sure the chain is around the freewheel before you drop the axle back into the dropouts, like so. So you see there's a flat side on these. You want to make sure the flat, you're kind of following the shape of the dropout. So you see the flat is parallel with the flat of that dropout, and as you bring it in and turn it, and it's going to go all the way back. You're going to feel a little bit of tension on the chain. That is perfectly fine. So carefully sit the weight of the bike on the wheel, and you're going to grab your outer washers, our anti-rotation washers. This prevents the motor. If it slips in the dropout, it won't allow the motor to completely spin, tearing the harness. So with these, you want to install them the same way they were on in the first place. I recommend the anti-rotation part, the nub, is on the back side versus the front side, so that any force is pressed against the dropout, against the frame, versus this open area that could open the whole entire frame dropout. So like that. Same thing on the other side, so make sure you put this washer on. And then you're gonna go ahead and put the nut on both sides. Now before you completely tighten it, you want to pull the wheel back to tension the chain. So what I recommend when you're tightening the nuts, tighten the nut on the drive side with the chain first, and then tighten the non-drive side where the brakes are. So what I normally do, if you're pushing against the kickstand and you're pulling the wheel back, you'll feel tension here on the chain. Go ahead and keep holding it in place, and then just lock the nut in. Once you feel it kind of snug, lock that down, and then check tension of the chain. This is pretty good. If you're barely touching it and it flops and it touches the frame, you have to make sure you loosen the nut and pull the wheel back further, and then retighten it so there's not too much slack in the chain. So now with the drive side done and the chain tensioned, the last thing we have to do when we tighten the left side, the non-drive side, we have to align the wheel. So aligning the wheel, if you don't have fenders, the easy thing to do is to, if you use this fender mount plus the kickstand bolt as a line of reference, you could center the wheel, but with the fender in the way, you're kind of not exactly guessing, but if you use the distance between the frame and the wheel on both sides, you can get it pretty close to straight. So with the wheel locked in place, we'll go ahead and lock the fender, or we'll lock the rack back in place and the fender bracket. So if we take our bolt for the fender, slide that through, slide that bolt through, and then attach the fender bracket on. On the other side, you're gonna have your split lock washer and then your nylon lock washer, or your nylon lock nut. And put the washer on the outside and the nut on. And then you can go ahead and tighten that. And then on the other side, same thing. Push the bolt through the fender, or through the rack. Through the rack, through the frame, and then right onto the fender. Same thing, lock nut on the bolt first, or lock washer on the bolt, and then we'll put the lock nut on. And then use those same tools as earlier, the 6mm and the 13mm wrench. We're just gonna lock all this down. Now before you lock it down completely, if you had your fenders at a certain height, because these are kind of height adjustable, then you want to make sure you align all that properly. I normally just drop all these all the way to the bottom and then lock it up. And we'll do the same thing on this side. Alright, with those locked in, we'll tighten the bolts on the very top of the rack that we loosened so that we can allow the rack to move. Now your rack is secure. Alright, so with the wheel tight, the fender's brackets are in place, the rack is in place, we're going to go ahead and put the brake caliper back on. Recommend making sure the brake calipers are run through the frame so that if you down the bike, if you get any damage on the side, you're not going to catch the brake hose. So you still have brakes. Just lock all that in place now. So as you're reinstalling the brake caliper, keep in mind that since you did realign the wheel, the brakes may have to be readjusted. So if there's a lot of interference and you're trying to lock this in place, you might have to loosen the two bolts, top and bottom, that allow the brake caliper body to move on the adapter, allowing you to adjust the brakes in the rear. With that loose, that should allow you to get that side-to-side place so you don't bend the brake rotor. And you just want to lock this in the same place your brakes were before. You should see an old kind of a pattern in the paint from where it was. Alright, and now with the brakes mounted to the frame, you can go ahead and do your brake job. And after you do the brakes, you can go ahead and plug the motor in. So the cable from the motor, which is pointing down to the ground, it's going to run behind this plate here and then plug right back into the motor. Make sure you're lining up the arrow with the corresponding arrow on the controller wire and plug all that together. And then you grab 2 zip ties and you'll zip tie this and you'll zip tie that and you're all done.
That's it?
That's everything.
Awesome, man. Thanks once again, Josh.
No problem. Sorry about the dirty hands.
Yeah, no worries, man. All right, guys, that does it for this video. My tire is nice and inflated now. Shout out to Josh again for helping me out with this, and shout out to John. He saw my Instagram post about my tire being flat and invited me out here to shoot the tutorial on it because they don't have tire changing videos yet, but now they do. So I hope you learned something. I hope this video helps if you ever have a flat tire. Shout out to Super73 again. So if you like this video, smash that like button and subscribe to my channel. I upload videos weekly, or at least I try to, and I will catch you guys in the next one. I gotta get home to the wife, so I'll see you guys later. Peace.